Welcome back to my video series on Akilah Obviously's copyright infringement case against Sargon of Akkad. If you haven't watched my previous videos in this series, I highly recommend you do so first. They go step by step through the case law that I argue makes Sargon's case for fair use, and essentially set up the argument I'm going to make in this video and the next one. At the very least, watch the previous video because it lays out the foundation for whether a work can be considered transformational, which is then built on in this video. With that in mind, let's lay out some additional concepts in regards to transformational nature. These are criticism, parody and satire, and market substitution. Criticism of a work is not necessarily transformational, but it is an expressly allowed fair use in the Copyright Act of 1976. Criticism therefore satisfies the first factor of fair use, even if the use is not transformational. While you can still fail the other fair use factors even when engaging in criticism, generally the courts give you extra leeway on those factors as well. For example, in Campbell v. Acuff Rose, the Supreme Court reiterated that there is no protectable derivative market for criticism. You'll remember in my video on Factor 4 of fair use, the effect on markets, I said Akilah could argue that Sargon should have licensed her video if he wanted to use it. Well, if his video is deemed to be criticism, then the answer is that no, this is not a recognized market by the Supreme Court. However, Akilah's complaint says that Sargon's video contains no additional content, commentary, or criticism, and therefore isn't criticism. In Bill Graham Archives v. Dorling Kindersley, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals found that if a work is transformationally different from the original expressive purpose, it need not be accompanied by comment or criticism. This starts to create this weird circular argument. Sargon's stated purpose was to transform Akilah's video into something that had a different expressive purpose, namely to be critical of her, and therefore didn't need any extra commentary because it was transformational. But because it didn't contain extra commentary, it wasn't transformational, and therefore did need extra commentary to be transformed into criticism. You see where the confusion on whether or not this is fair use is starting to come from. So let's just put a pin in that for now, and we'll come back to that in the final video. Next we have parody, which is considered to be both transformational and critical of the original work, and satire, which is legally different from parody. Returning to the Supreme Court's ruling, they define parody as follows. Modern dictionaries accordingly describe a parody as a literary or artistic work that imitates the characteristic style of an author or a work for comic effect or ridicule, or as a composition in prose or verse in which the characteristic turns of thought and phrase in an author or class of authors are imitated in such a way as to make them appear ridiculous. For the purposes of copyright law, the nub of the definitions, in the heart of any parodist claim to quote from existing material, is the use of some elements of a prior author's composition to create a new one that, at least in part, comments on the author's works. Campbell also makes satire distinct from parody, stating in the footnotes that satire has been defined as a work in which prevalent follies and vices are assailed with ridicule, Oxford English Dictionary, or are attacked through irony, derision, or wit, American Heritage Dictionary. And in comparing it to parody, saying, satire can stand on its own 2 feet and so requires justification for the very act of borrowing. In Blanche v. Coons, the Second Circuit Court further clarified that satire tends to target a genre rather than a specific piece of work. Sargon has repeatedly claimed his video was satire and on at least one occasion claimed it was parody. Given these legal definitions, you could probably argue that this is either parody or satire in that Sargon's purpose is to target Akilah specifically, but also the people that hold her views more broadly as well. You may disagree with whether or not this is parody, but Campbell also puts limits on a court's ability to make that determination, stating that the threshold question when fair use is raised in defense of parody is whether a parodic character may reasonably be perceived. Whether going beyond that, parody is in good taste or bad does not and should not matter in fair use. While we might not assign a high rank to the parodic element here, we think it fair to say that Two Live Crew's song reasonably could be perceived as commenting on the original or criticizing it to some degree. In Leibovitz v. Paramount Pictures, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals expanded on Campbell, saying, a work which uses the original as parody when it is not merely different, it differs in a way that may reasonably be perceived as commenting through ridicule. Whether or not Sargon's video reasonably could be perceived as commenting on the original or criticizing it to some degree is the argument Sargon has to make. but we'll put a pin in this as well and return to it in the final video. The last element we're going to talk about in this video is market substitution. Market substitution in the fair use defense looks at whether the new work can be said to replace the original in the marketplace. Typically, this is looked at in the fourth factor regarding the new work's effect on the market of the original, and in the third factor in determining if substantiality of the portion used was too great. However, market substitution can also be used as a test for the transformative nature of a work. In the previous video, I mentioned Kelly v. Arriba where the images were considered to be transformative, in part because they were low resolution and could not, therefore, be considered a market substitute for the original. Whether or not Sargon's video can be considered a market substitute for the original is again an issue for the courts to decide. As I explained in my video on the substantiality of the portion used, Sargon's video excludes the elements that Akilah found most important and could arguably not be a substitute for it. I also mentioned in my video about effects on the market that Sargon's video linked to Akilah's original and had driven traffic to Akilah's. This traffic was likely in part from people going to her video and commenting on what they thought of her views, but also likely in part people going to watch Akilah's video in full and see her comments in their full context. This too is an argument for Sargon's video being transformative enough not to be considered a substitute for the original. Once again, however, we're going to have to put a pin in this until the next video where I wrap all of this up. I know I left a lot of things hanging in this video, but doing so is necessary. All the elements that I have laid out in this video are arguably up for debate, and Sargon's case largely hangs on whether or not he can convince the court of his perspective. However, in the next video, I'm going to lay out the shocking evidence that actually proves Sargon's case, and so arguing any one of the points above to completion would have taken away from the explanation of the rest of the points and the magnitude of the evidence. Now, I realize this is kind of clickbaity, but to be fair, it's not like I have monetization turned on for these videos. I'm doing this purely for dramatic effect, and I think you'll appreciate it in the next video. That being said, what are your thoughts on the questions I left hanging in this video? Was Sargon's video criticism? Was it transformational? Was it parody or satire? Can it be considered a market substitute for Akilah's video? Please tell me what you think in the comments below. And of course, as I've said in my previous videos, this is a brand new channel, and that means these videos making the legal case for Sargon aren't going to show up in anybody's feeds. Obviously, Sargon can't comment on this case too much for legal reasons, and there's a lot of bad information out there that's damaging his reputation. If you think I make a good argument and want to help spread the word, click the subscribe button and share these videos on social media. Thanks for all your help, and see you in the next video.